Good afternoon from our studio in Amsterdam. This is the TBLI Radical Truth podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have as our guest Henri van Eeghen. For those of you that are not familiar with Henri, he will tell you his whole story, but he has decades of experience as CEO, board member, advisor in helping to make a transition to more sustainable economy in energy, water, health, food, transportation on many, many levels in the non-philanthropic space and also in the investment space. So, Henri, for those that are not familiar with you and you come from a prominent Dutch family, please tell us a little bit about who you are, about your journey, your big purpose, and ultimately, how can the audience help you?
Hmm. Thanks so much, Robert. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast and to have that conversation with all those who are listening. I welcome a conversation. So if any of the information you hear today is interesting to you and you want to reach out, please do so through LinkedIn or through any other way. Robert can give you details as well. Because this world is needing change and we see it is happening. There is a transformation going on. I'm absolutely convinced of that happening at this moment too. And I really believe that true collaboration is central to making the changes that are needed. But just to go back a little bit, where do I come from? I'm a Dutch national, but left the Netherlands at the age of 14
Oh.
to boarding school in the UK because I was kicked out for the second time in school in the Netherlands. So I was a little bit rebellious, probably to parents and my environment. But after a long time, I lived in Asia for many years. I studied in Canada and Finland and Scotland and in France as well. Lived in 14 countries. Started
Wow.
my career actually in the paper and reforestation industry. Lived
Mm.
in Asia many years. Did large reforestation projects with the World Bank in West Kalimantan for those who know Indonesia.
Mm.
But also started joint ventures in China and South Korea and Japan and different parts of Asia. So I spent a lot of time in Asia and then came back and spent some time in Europe and worked also still in the for-profit sector. And I still remember, as you know, maybe some of us go through a midlife crisis in their 40s. I remember a searcher coming to me and calling me, and he knew me, and he said, Henry, do you want to start doing something useful with your life and earn maybe 80% less?
Mm.
And I was like, um, let's go and have dinner. I want to listen to you because you've been thinking about why you challenged me this way. And so he did challenge me and said, I've got a tremendous position with an organization called Cordaid in the Netherlands.
Mm.
You can be the CEO there. You can make a transition in the non-for-profit world. And the great thing is this organization also has an investment fund of some 80, 90 million euros. And that didn't take long for me to make that choice. And I think the choice is too is that at some point in our lives we realize that our material wealth is really not very interesting. It doesn't make us happier. It doesn't show up in any way. And in fact, it may be even an impediment for us to live fully our own lives. So I made a change. And what was kind of interesting, because we're talking also about investments and how investments can lead to change and in the world around us. I still remember coming to Cordaid, and then, of course, one of the things I asked is, this investment fund, can I see the balance sheet? And they said, no, we don't have a balance sheet. And I said, and I came from the for-profit world, and I was like, well, how do you manage it? He says, well, money comes in and money goes out. I said, yes, that's what my wife tells me all the time when I look at my own household. This is interesting, and I kind of had to smile, because the intentions, of course, were right. that to use investments as a change, as a way to change. And as the Chinese would say, look always at the other side of the coin. And I saw it as a huge opportunity. And how can we leverage 80 million of funding? How can we professionalize that? And so I put a team together and we professionalized that investment fund. We increased that in size and then started to leverage it. And that's maybe one of the ways in which we can really do more is to leverage the funds that we have by working together. So we set up a new fund with IFC, with the proceeds of the IFC in West Africa, the West Africa Venture Fund, which was really making investments in extremely tough conditions in Niger, in Mali, in Senegal, in countries where really it's not easy to make investments. And at the same time, is there entrepreneurship in those countries? Of course there is. Are there opportunities? Yes, but you must really understand the opportunities. So we did an investment fund with IFC. Then we set up a joint venture with Rabo, and a bank in the Netherlands, a cooperative bank, and then used it to leverage further. And then suddenly the investment fund grew to about 150 million. And suddenly when you actually look at the impact that you're hoping to realize with your other partners, there's suddenly 600, 700 million that is being used because you leverage and you collaborate. And it's really essential that we do it. We are still, as people, still very, ethnocentric in the way we work. We want it to be our organization. We want to show up as our organization. And I think one of the things that I have learned is we need to get to a higher level of consciousness. And at a higher level of consciousness is do away with power and ownership and rethink that. And rethink how you can use those things that are given to us, and they're only given to us for a certain time period because we won't take them with us as we leave this world, and make maximum use of it. And what is the responsibility that we have when we do so? So that's always been part of my way of working, and maybe I have developed further in terms of creating higher levels of consciousness and being more aware of my own role as a leader as well. And so I've been quite involved in organizational transformations in most of the organizations that I have joined, whether it was Mercy Corps or Cordaid, which we helped shape into a more social enterprise model. With a joint venture with NView in Rotterdam, or in a philanthropic organization that I ran in New York, Synergos Institute, with some 400 family members, wow. and philanthropists from all continents, except the one which is not really inhabited, but all other continents, and which has been exciting too, because it's been, of course, getting philanthropists together and to think how can we work together instead of all individually, as we do. And maybe one thing that I can, if it's all right, Robert, one thing that I would like to share also is I just wrote a piece on the change in the aid sector, and I think there are huge opportunities. And at the same time, the demise of USAID and other institutional funders who have reduced their funding have had a negative impact too, especially to very poor communities. They've also helped us to rethink how do we actually provide an added value. And I think many organizations, and there's been some tremendous books coming out of Africa too, which have been helping us to rethink what does this way of doing aid actually mean? And there is, of course, a colonial element to it. And so we need to undo that. And there's opportunity there as well. And there are some organizations, I can mention, for instance, SMV in the Netherlands, which have really turned around in the way that they think that they could offer value. But where it becomes really interesting is you have typically a situation where impact funds one of the lacks that many of them have is boots on the ground.
Yeah.
What is happening in the countries? And on the other hand, you have these NGOs who have boots on the ground through their partners and so on. So this is a match made in heaven. Those organizations should really start talking and learning from each other, because the knowledge which we need on the ground will reduce our alpha risk when we make an investment. And the knowledge of making good, sound investments come from many of the impact investment funds. So when you bring that together, there is new opportunity. There are new possibilities. And you see it starting to happen. So I would encourage impact funds to look for NGOs which really have those boots on the ground, which are also interested in change. And let us not forget that if we want to collaborate truly, collaboration only happens when we both give up something for the new to come. Otherwise, it's a partnership. I
Right.
partner with you, I fund you, then we have a partnership. But a collaboration means it's equal, and you have to give up something for the new to emerge. And that new can emerge in this particular example. And the last thing that I would say to impact investment funds, and it's of course difficult to generalize because there are fabulous impact investments out there, but I remember going to a 10-year anniversary of the Dutch Good Growth Fund last
Mhm.
year in October. And I was quite involved when that was started, because that was during my Cordaid time. And at the end of the day, great to have the celebration, some fabulous presentations, but 70%, and I really just kept, really looking at it, 70% of the time was spent talking about financial returns.
Yeah.
And that's the world the wrong way round. It's understandable because many impact investors come from the financial world and want to do something good. And so we take our tools that we know well and kind of use them as we make presentations. But we should really turn it around. So when an impact fund makes a presentation, start first by the impact that you are realizing or hoping to realize, whether it's environmental or social or in any other way. And then at the end, the financial result is a result of the impact that you're hoping to realize. And it's really starting to think the other way around. And I think it's essential because otherwise we will not make some of the investments that we should be making.
But is that concept that you just said, is that getting through? Because I looked at almost all of the wealth reports that come out every year from the private banks, and it's almost close to 5 times more wealth than global GDP. So no shortage of money. A lot is in real estate, I get it, but there's still a lot of money. And it's constant complaints from those who are in social enterprise or impact funds or emerging managers or emerging markets or frontier markets, complaining about the difficulty in getting even impact investors to commit. How do we break that mindset?
I think it requires a conversation, and that is a conversation of higher consciousness, of higher purpose.
Hmm.
What is it why we do what we want to do? Are we excited about the return? Do we want to brag about that at the next drinks? Or do we want to say something about the new startups in Indonesia in the energy transition and talk about 5 or 6 organizations which are almost Series A
Wow.
and getting ready to be invested? Is that the story that we want to give? And I would say the latter is a more exciting story than the first one.
Hmm.
And maybe what it does require is really getting in touch with the impact that you're realizing, because then you can embody it. If I talk to a philanthropist, somebody has told his company and says he wants to do something, and I'm like, yes, but let's first spend some time for you to get to know where your potential impact could be realized. So you have a full understanding of the environment within which your money will be working in the end. And spend 3 months, 6 months, spend 3 months in the Amazon. If you want to spend time in the Amazon, spend time with local leaders there, understand the issues that are there. And then at the end of the conversation, talk about what is the financial needs to make the change that is directed from the communities that are out there. And then you have a different conversation and you have a different celebration too. Because then we don't talk about, I've made a 15% IRR on it. No, you really talk about what's been the change within the communities or the social enterprise or the enterprise which has started up there, and how has it affected people and planet. And that's the conversation that we want to have. We don't want to have that at a distance. We want that to be connected to our heart. And then it will connect to our head because, we've grown up in the West so much with using our head that we've lost a little bit our heart,
Very
right?
true. Very
And
true.
we need to sort of reconnect that and actually realize that the heart is where, the real things happen. And we can talk today about things like love. We can talk about intuition. We can talk about our feminine energy and so on in a different way than we've ever done before. It's an exciting journey when you actually get on that journey. So get out of your comfort zone on the Zuidas in Amsterdam or wherever it may be, and go and go and see. I've had the privilege of traveling the world, living in different countries in Africa as well, and it's been an enormous learning journey, and learning journey of deep listening, not just thinking we know what is best and how to change it, but actually listening to what is happening on the ground and then seeing the change coming from initiatives which are there. And then, yes, do we have something to offer? For sure, we have technical things to offer. We have financials to offer. We have all kinds of different things that we can offer. Supply chains, which can improve, getting companies in the West to be more interested and so on, but also making sure that as supply chains change in Ghana, that it also comes to the benefit of people living in African countries. And not just the supply chain from Ghana into the Netherlands for the cocoa industry, but actually looking at markets in Africa as well, for instance, which normally we don't do.
You spoke a lot about uh, addressing the issue of raising consciousness, but
Yeah,
that is at a point when someone has a crossroad in their life, whether a breakdown, breakthrough, whatever. It could be a variety of reasons. And and you've worked with a lot of big philanthropists, institutional investors, DFIs, insurance companies, banks, so the mindset that many have is just achieving their targets.
yeah,
And you're talking of, okay, getting them to understand a bigger purpose. But many are not there yet. So how do you get them there when they're not at your level of consciousness? They just want to get, I need to increase my AUM by 5%. Is this going to get me there?
yes, yeah. Well, first of all, the first it's the realization it's not going to happen with everybody. Everybody has their own journey,
Okay.
right? So have respect for everybody's own journey. My journey is my journey, and your journey is another one again. Uh, um, but if we see that there is possibility to, from doing to doing with, and finally to being with, right? Those are 3 steps. Most of what we do, we do something to somebody.
Right.
And then it is like, oh, let's do something with you. And then being with actually means really being with, right? It's not doing. Being with means we are in community. So those are the sort of steps that we need to make. It is moving from practicing regenerative
Mhm.
rather than extractive relationships. It is embracing somatic wisdom over technocratic knowledge. It is moving from fragmentation to wholeness.
And
And
does
it,
the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and that sort of feels like very high, but
Mhm.
it's not when we get down to it. It is really, really real. And on an individual level, it really means that we have to use inner work as a foundation. So it is our own inner work. What is our role? How do we connect to that world around us? And start from that and not immediately from, I've got finances, I can do this, and I'm looking for that, and so on. Because in a way, if I get that 15% IRR, it's sort of feeding my ego,
Yeah.
right? That's what it's doing. And I'm not saying that's all wrong, but there is another story out there which is far more exciting. And it is about the issues that we see around us. I mean, even with the Olympics starting
Yeah.
today, right? And we see, whoa, they have huge issues with enough snow. Yes,
Yeah.
well, we knew that was coming for about 20 years. So, what is it that we truly do about climate change? And what is our contribution in that? And I think that's on a personal level. And then on a relational level is really the co-creation and co-creating new patterns. And it is, we talk about capacity building and things like that, right? So we need to, but do some of the reverse capacity building. How much knowledge is there out there? And this is not a one-directional thing.
Mhm.
If you and I have a good conversation, we have learning from both sides. I'm listening to you, Robert, intently with the wisdom that you have, and you do the other way around. And then we have an enriching experience. And it is not one way, which we sort of very often sort of work. It's like moving from localizing our work to a sort of homecoming to realize that we're all connected as human beings.
Does your philosophy and approach, because I'm sure you get a lot of requests from some asset owners or family office or philanthropist or NGO or DFI who are asking help in mentoring or getting buy-in. So you have a lot of experience, and
Mhm.
my client is not there yet, and I want to go faster than the music. Do you find that your concept works better with the actual end asset owner or beneficiary owner, like a family office, rather than an intermediary, fund manager, etc.?
It depends. There are some fund managers out there which are doing truly remarkable work,
Oh, okay.
and so they are out there as well. But the closer you are to the family which is hoping to have an impact one way or another, because I mean, the typical story, of course, is what do we leave for our grandchildren? What's the history book that they're going to be writing about our generation and the generation before ours? Well, we know it's not going to be a great book. We've depleted resources, we've created more havoc than in the last 2,000 years, 3,000, 4,000 years. So many of us want to leave something different for our grandchildren, or if we don't have grandchildren, to our nieces and nephews and what
Sure.
have you not. So anyway, a changing world. So getting closer to those families is absolutely essential. I mean, today I'm giving some advice to three types of organization. One is a group of conscious investors,
Hmm.
um, mostly families in Belgium and the Netherlands at the moment, but it could become much bigger than that, who work from those principles and then put their funding together. You
Oh,
have a
good.
different conversation altogether. I work with a Canadian organization which is sort of supporting other organizations to do well and to use different financing models. And they look at impact bonds as well as other forms of financial instruments. And then from my time at New Energy Nexus, we started a new fund in Singapore, which is still open for new investors, which really focuses on early stage up to Series A. So the valley of death, as some like to call it, I would like to call it the valley of life. That's where things are happening. That's where new ideas come, new entrepreneurs, and yes, there's lots of failure within that period, but that's just inherent to being an early stage startup. The risks are higher, the financial risks are higher, but the potential for impact is huge. So that fund is looking at philanthropists who really think the other way around, who will be very, very content if the investment fund is making true impact and they're not immediately interested in the financial return. I realize that when you're early stage that you're going to have failure and it's
Yeah.
going to be part of how it is. But what if you go through that journey and that investment fund is with the organization which are now independent in different countries, working together with new startups. So there's on the ground information, which is even more important when you have early stage investors. So you really need to be on the ground. You need to be very close to the investee, and the investee needs to be very close to you. And it's very often that the services that you provide go much further than usual. So that it really is not a transactional relationship. It's much more than that, and can be very celebratory after some years when things work well. I mean, I remember as an example, a person who wanted to assemble electric motorbikes for usage in Jakarta.
Mm.
But he wanted to assemble them in Indonesia, not produce them, but assemble them. So he got most of the products from China and then started to assemble it and started to sell them in Jakarta, but had to set up an infrastructure, all that is needed for batteries and what have you, all the issues that are out there. So he was cushioned with other experts to help him succeed. And now, last year, he was selling 10,000 motorbikes a month.
Wow.
Yes. And so he was becoming a Series A. So the investment fund then said, this is our farewell. You're moving into the next stage, and we don't do that. But of course, then he can have conversations with VCs. He can have conversations with other type of investment funds. But that journey took probably 3 years from the first contact to, and that's still fast, right? In 3 years to be able to sell 10,000 motorbikes a month.
That's
But it's an
incredible.
example of a success. And of course, with that success, there are also other examples where things didn't quite work out for whatever reason. But you've got to understand the reasons, right? Are they institutional problems within the country? In Indonesia, one of the issues is that gasoline is subsidized.
Yeah.
Well, then you have a problem introducing electric motorbikes, right? Because it's more difficult to compete, even though we know today solar energy is more competitive than gasoline. But if you have a distorted marketplace, then that's a problem. So then you need to have discussions with government and with others. How can you open that up so that entrepreneurs can really have the success that they could be having, like has happened in Pakistan, for instance, which
Yeah.
has
I mean,
become,
just look at Thailand.
yeah,
Why are there so many traffic jams in Bangkok? Because cars are cheap and gas is cheap. It's a
yes,
government decision to make that because we want to be the Detroit of Southeast Asia, and too many cars because everybody can get a car and get financing, and gasoline is cheap. If you make it expensive, there'll be less.
totally, totally. Or like in some of the Western countries, you close down parts of the city.
Yeah.
and then they suddenly become areas for pedestrians and for shopping and for restaurants and what have you not. So
You
yes.
you were mentioning that you're maybe mentoring is not the right word, advising, guiding, helping some families in the Benelux about expanding their focus on impact investing. Are these organization or family, do they come to you or do you search them out?
And I've met most of them at meetings.
Ah,
So
okay, so it's
so
from your
that's
network, I
and
see.
so that's sort of, and then it's word of mouth, and then somebody else talks and calls and says, "Hey, can we have a conversation?" And then we can have a conversation. And I don't do advisory work myself
Mhm.
because I really enjoy leading an organization. And although I've left New Energy Nexus at the end of last year, I'm looking for an opportunity to lead another organization going forward because I really enjoy supporting organizations going through a transformation. With all that is needed around us, there are many sectors which really need fundamental change. Even our economies need changing, right? You have the Well-Being Economy Alliance with 600 organizations and 7 countries which have signed up for it. And they're truly looking at a different way of looking at what does GDP really mean, right? And
Mm.
we talk about it, and redefining what we measure and value beyond GDP. Well, we should be doing it on a country level as well, preventing upstream through more participatory designs rather than fixing downstream, which many of us sort of do. It's very nice to fly somewhere and then pay off our CO2 tax, but that doesn't decrease the amount of CO2.
No.
It improves our consciousness, or at least our, our our feeling of doing something bad. But I think there's so much need for change at the moment, and we should be really open to it. It requires
Sure.
lots of creativity.
And patience, because it's really long-term farming and not hunting. Financial people in general are hunters. They're incentivized for short-term behavior. You're you're very, I would say, very non-judgmental. You accept the person you're here. Maybe you want to get there. Maybe I can help you get there, but I'm not going to say, wow, your children are really ugly. Why did you get started that way? This is a mess. So I take the other approach. I'm more the George Carlin telling people that children are ugly. Um, and I admire that you understand the mentality, the pressures, whether it's an asset owner or a service provider, that they're in trying to navigate and either generate returns at the same time they might be quite keen on transitioning to full
Yeah,
impact. But
yeah.
how do you keep that patience? Don't you ever get angry? Says, listen, I've been talking to you for 5 years. What have you done?
Maybe sometimes if it's a very close friend, I'll have that sort of Dutch directness, which I do have. But it's good to be kind,
Very well
actually.
said.
When I was 28, um, my thinking was, when do I get my first lease car?
Yeah,
Right. And now I think, why? I mean, why did you need that lease car?
yeah,
No, I don't own a car,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah,
very comfortable not owning a car
yeah,
and having, one of these organizations where if I really need a car over the weekend or for a day, I can get a car to use it for the day, but I can choose an electric car. And so I've gone through a process of change. I mean, this is just a
mhm,
simplistic kind of example, but
sure.
of course that has happened in many realms of my life where things have changed. And it doesn't make me better. That's maybe another. We like to qualify, but having deep interest in the other person is a starting point for change, right? Uh, um, and I can talk to somebody else who maybe, comes out of the financial world and that's his or her world. Well, that's where he or she has got her legitimacy.
Right.
And so it's very easy to then be critical and say, what are you doing there? Why are you using your brain and all your wisdom in the next financial transaction? And I'd say, let's have a dialogue, let's have a conversation. What's
Mhm.
important to you? Well, then other things come up. And suddenly these financial returns are not really that important. There are other things that come up. It's a child who's maybe having some issues, or it is a relationship which is having some pressure, or other things that come up. And then suddenly we end up with a different conversation. And from that conversation, things can happen. Uh, um, yeah.
I remember when TBLI started and trying to educate asset owners and managers and service providers around sustainable investment. I never really found it very challenging in getting buy-in. The challenge was access. The more money somebody had, the more isolated they were. But, anyone, I always asked, asset owners, do you want a financial return with a social environmental added value? And no one ever said to me, no, 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 I want all my money to make life miserable for everyone. And I'm
Mhm.
working at that 24/7. For me, it was always an educational issue because they're often quite isolated and they're all kind of guards keeping new information out, whether it's a private
Mhm. Mhm.
bank, wealth manager. So I found that it wasn't really that difficult, and this story that impact is philanthropy, it's money losing, bad teams, etc. And I would say the same thing about traditional investments, all these claims of hedge funds always get 30% returns and private equity funds always get 25 and 30%
Yes.
returns, which is
Yeah.
not, and every fund manager beats the benchmark. But few people push back on that. And I always found it important to try to give reality checks to people and let them, look at that and that there's lots of, like your the concept, the story you said about the Indonesian electric bike manufacturer in Indonesia going from zero to 10,000 vehicles a month. So I always found there's loads of solutions. It's that
Of course.
most asset owners operate in a small ghetto and they don't leave that ghetto. And that
Yeah.
ghetto is, I don't know, the Financial Dagblad, Wall Street Journal, the neighborhood, their tennis or sailing or whatever. And how do we get through? How do we get access if you're not in that network?
It's in the end, it's a conversation. I mean, maybe Robert Bogard. He's
Yeah,
a
sure.
Dutch philanthropist, and of course he writes and presents on what's enough,
Yeah.
right? And he just shows like, come on, there's such opportunity out there. You still have your comfortable life.
Sure.
Start to get into action modus and do something useful, and that's a good starting point, right? And then it's still, so what is it that the impact is that we're hoping to realize? But having those kind of conversations are sort of a wake-up call. And I think for some people they are wake-up calls, and and they go through a huge change process. And for others it remains a little bit the same, and they remain in, yes, my financial returns are important, and if there is some side benefit on social impact or in the environment, then that's okay. Or if there's no damage done, then that would be fine. But that's just how it is. But I think, generally speaking, there is um, so much more discussion today about wanting to have real impact,
Mhm.
right? I think many of us around us are having that conversation. And of course, we need to find those paths of doing it, and find that even our system, where we sort of say, well, our economic system is not really functioning very well. And I'd say, yes, I agree. Our capitalist system is dysfunctional. because it has in the end also created what it has, right? If we have our plastic soup in the ocean, it is because our capitalist system has never put any cost to our throwing away plastics and using plastics. So we need to have a more full costing system to actually get to a different place. Now, what is true at the same time is we're addicted to our system,
Yeah.
right? And addictions, like most of us, I used to smoke when I was younger. I don't do it today, but getting rid of the addiction is not that easy.
No.
And realizing that change is fundamental, yeah, is kind of tough because what's next? What then does it look like? Where do I get my security from? But we don't get security from our system. In 2008, our economies were almost collapsing until the taxpayer paid for the banks which were in trouble. But if we have a next financial crisis, probably taxpayers are not going to be able to do that anymore. So then we will really face a crisis of a magnitude much larger. And maybe that's the trigger that we need for the change, right? Sometimes as human beings, we need a trigger to actually get into action modus.
You've worked and lived in many different continents in Africa, US, Europe, Asia. I don't know about Latin America, but you've probably been there many, many times. Do you find a difference in how asset owners or philanthropists of those various continents are perceive or are open to the idea of impact? Does it make a difference, or everyone is pretty much the same? I want 15% return.
No, well, first of all, not everybody is looking for 15% return. And I think, there's lots of investments that are being made which we don't see because they don't go through a fund, which then has a
Sure.
report and so on and so forth. But I would say there's a lot of similarities because we are human beings. So philanthropists or families which are doing investment in Brazil are quite similar to the ones in China. They might have a different geographic look or where they would like to do things, but that's just normal personal preference of where you grow up. And if you're in Brazil, then maybe there are things around pollution that you really want to spend time on, or on the reforestation or things like that. And if you're in China, it may be a completely different story again. So so I think what you see with some North American and European philanthropists and families is that they still have quite a lot of international way of working.
Mm.
That you see less with philanthropists in Africa.
Hmm.
Let's say with the Dangote family from
Sure.
Nigeria, it's a good example. They invest really in Africa.
Yeah.
And you see that in South America and in China with, or in Vietnam or Indonesian philanthropists. Some are, as rich as any other philanthropist,
Sure.
and they're still investing very much local. So I
Is
think
that
that's
because
the
they don't
difference.
have access to other things, or is it just I feel more comfortable at home?
I don't, I think I would ask them. I mean, how they look at it. Maybe they just say, well, I see the needs around me are just so large. I want to really spend time on that. But if you talk to Frederick from TPC in Singapore,
Oh yeah,
highly conscious
sure.
investor,
Mhm.
um, then yes, he has a real world view on what is needed and pretty close to some of my thinking around higher consciousness and our sense of humanity. So I think there are obviously differences in India too. You have, the owners of the Sun Group, the Kemke family are a good example of having very global views. Um, but you know, and philanthropy actually has a history everywhere, right? It's not something of today. There's been
No.
philanthropy earlier. Even my forefathers, when We started our family company in 1662.
Wow.
It was normal to give back to society. It was, in fact, it was your religious um, prerogative that you had to give back to society. And that's why the Vondelpark came in Amsterdam, or a hospital for the so-called commoner. Well, those were philanthropic endeavors. Some of them were investors in investments as well. So back in the 17th century, that was happening too. It's part of our humanity. And philanthropy is really a form of love. That's really what it is in essence.
How, for those that have world-beating solutions around climate, poverty, food, energy, and that, and they have this great idea, but who should I contact?
Yeah.
Because as I said, the more money someone has, usually the more isolated they are. Most Jeff Bezos doesn't have a sign on his house, "Hi, I have billions, come visit me." And that's the case with many. They would keep a low profile. Um, but you started an organization, a new energy Nexus, um, about a couple of years ago to address that issue on the energy side.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and there's probably lots, but what advice would you give an entrepreneur that is addressing that in what's the most efficient manner to find potential grants or investment to achieve their big purpose? Because there's lots of money out there, but
Yeah.
all for people to say, "Oh, where should I start?"
And there's no one simple solution to that, of course. There just isn't, because it's also based on personal preferences, on things that you find important. So I would say is talk to um, somebody who has knowledge, and you can find them. There are philanthropic advisors. There's some really great philanthropic advisors out there here in Europe, in North America, in Asia, and so on. Start talking to them, and let yourself be taken on a journey. So and I mean, my advice would be, do not talk immediately money.
Hmm.
So start by what is it that really you would like to contribute to? And that could be the German lady philanthropist who
Hmm.
spent time in the Amazon
Right.
before even talking money. And then she really understood what were the needs out there. And she really had a contact, and she was working with and becoming part of that community. And then suddenly money becomes just a means to an end. And it's just one means to an end because there's lots of other things needed. Money doesn't do everything.
No.
Right? So start the conversation with some of the advisors that are out there. There are some really great advisors, some big organizations like Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors in New York. I have a whole list of names, but it can be also individual people who I know. So people could reach out. I'm more than happy to connect them, and then it's your personal choice who you want to work with.
You stopped leading the new energy nexus, and now you're in transition or opening up to the universe. How can those that are listening to this recording help you?
Um, have a conversation. I think that's essential. So if there's somebody who has listened to this podcast and says, "Wow, I'm kind of interested to have a further conversation," then do reach out and let me know. I go through LinkedIn, send me a message, and we'll find time for coffee or a virtual coffee if we're in different countries and different places, and see where that leads to.
You're
Um,
you're you're very accessible and non-extractive. How do you, I mean, I wish you would give master classes to some of other asset owners and philanthropists because many are still extractive and not accessible.
mm. There's a bunch of exercises you can do uh, and then, we're confronted with ourselves, right? And when we're confronted with ourselves, hopefully it sort of then comes the realization that, oh, wow, this is actually the way that I am behaving or I am doing things. Can I do things in a different way? And that's the start for change. But we're mostly moved when we become really personal.
Mm. So trying to connect with others on a personal level that addresses their soul.
Yeah, yeah, that's a nice definition. And then it's different organizations and it's different levels that will fit you as a person in the time that you are in this world at this moment, right? And I think that's also that, and that's being self-aware of where you are as a person and in your own journey of life. I think that's an important thing to start with. Where am I? And what are kindred souls? What are kindred people that I really want to connect to and have a conversation? How do I have a conversation where I get challenged? Do we dare that? And we can see that in our companies that we organize. If you only have yaysayers in your management team, you're not going to realize very much. But at the moment that you have a few naysayers that you can have a true conversation with, then creativity can start. If we do deep listening, right? It's our role of CEOs. I mean, I've been a CEO for quite many years now. And if I think of how I was 20 years ago or now, I would say that today's CEO, in the complexity that we live in, becomes much more of a follower. That's a very different role than we're used to. When I started in the US, it was like, oh, the CEO sits on this pedestal and, is all benevolent, omnipotent, and knows everything. And I'm like, no, thank you. I don't want to be even seen like that. It feels very, very uncomfortable. So if there is an issue, I'd like to give it back to you and say, what would you do? And tell me, you're the one who has knowledge on that particular field. So you become more of a follower, but critical follower. So you're there to ask the right questions. And then we all know when people are more empowered, change happens, right? We all feel much greater if we have an opportunity to do something ourselves and do not need to tick boxes every time to do anything. Yeah.
You've been in the space quite a while, as we've seen from this podcast, and you've engaged with many. Yet, despite of the challenges, only a very small percentage of all the assets going to restore the social environmental balance, which I might get upset about it. You see, well, there's an opportunity for that to grow, so you look at it in a very positive way. Are you still quite optimistic about the direction of money flows toward addressing social and environmental dis unbalance?
I think it's difficult to give a qualitative statement about it because if we really would do a deep analysis, a lot of money is still going in the wrong places,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And it's not just small change.
no,
This is
no,
really
no.
big money that is being invested in the wrong places. So in that sense, that money hasn't really changed. And even though impact investment has become a sector of its own over the past 20 years or so, it's still compared to all the financial flows that are happening today, a very small portion of everything that is happening. And that's a fact. And so much more is needed to really make the radical changes that we need. And we realize we feel uncomfortable with governments not taking the actions that are needed, or governments even retreating, like the US government is retreating
Mm.
from its commitments. And we're also thinking, what do we do about these Paris Accords now? Do we just do it without the US? How do we go on? Because we realize think change is needed. So it's not like we're in a great position at the moment. I would say there is a lot of positive energy about change, and that's why we're having this conversation today. And maybe
Mhm.
this conversation wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. But at the same time, like the clock was showing, how many minutes it is before the end of the world. It's 2 minutes to 12. We have a serious situation in many, many ways, and that's a fact of life. So I'm hopeful for us as humanity, but at the same time, sometimes I think it's like we really need to hit the wall in a big way
Mm.
in order for us to be prepared to change.
Yeah, sometimes an alcoholic needs to reach rock bottom before they repent and change their behavior. And maybe
Yeah.
the pain is not great enough. I remember there was a CEO of a Dutch foundation in The Hague, and he told me, well, we had a hospital, we sold it, we had about 500 million in assets, and I want to start doing impact investing in ESG, but I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I know that. So he said, let's try to do the easiest index investing ETF. So he asked his wealth manager, we want to start doing ESG ETFs and index investing. So the wealth manager said, oh no, that's a terrible idea. You're going to lose lots of money. So I said, okay, I'll go look for another wealth manager who can do that. And then all of a sudden, the wealth manager said, no, 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 we can do it for you. So every year he did a little more. He started doing philanthropy and started doing supporting local communities, started doing venture and private equity and real estate. And I think it was after about 5 or 6 or 7 years, he called me and he says, Robert, it's really not that hard to do if you want to do it, but it's really hard to do if you don't want to do it. And it always struck me as it's not that hard if you really want to do it. And
Sure.
if you don't want to do it, just say so.
Yeah,
Don't waste people time. People are busy. Let them focus on others who actually do want to mobilize capital for that. This has been
absolutely.
a joy listening to you. And also, I admire your resilience and your patience and your non extractive, um, non judgmental behavior in trying to move the needle among asset owners, etc. So, thank you so much for doing that heavy lifting because I know I definitely would not have the patience that you have. So I admire that very, very much. And if there's anything that we can do or anything that you want us to share with this podcast, just let me know. And I'll put this on stop.
Sure.
Okay.